Ben Cooper retreated to the river to escape the bankruptcy that took his farm, believing the murky water would bury his shame forever. But he didn't count on the heat wave. As the water level dropped to a historic low, the drying mud revealed something that wasn't supposed to be there. It was a rusted piece of evidence that had been waiting 5 years to prove his tragedy was actually a crime. Ben Cooper gripped the steering wheel of his rusted pickup as it rattled down the dirt road toward the county auction house. His hands were calloused from 40 years of working soil his grandfather had first broken with a mule and plow. Now those same hands trembled, not from age, but from the weight of what he was about to do with his last $847. The auction house parking lot was half empty. Ben recognized most of the vehicles, neighbors who'd come to witness another farm family's collapse. Some nodded respectfully as he passed. Others looked away. Everyone knew why Ben Cooper was here, and it wasn't to buy anything worth owning. Inside, the auctioneer's voice echoed off concrete walls, bored and mechanical. Ben waited through the sale of rusted tractors, broken furniture, boxes of mason jars. Then came Lot 47. One houseboat, 1987 model, as is, no warranty, no inspection, currently moored at Blind Man's Slough. The room went quiet. Blind Man's Slough was where things went to rot. Boats, dreams, occasionally bodies that the river decided to give back. Nobody went there by choice. Starting bid, $500, the auctioneer announced without enthusiasm. Ben raised his paddle. The auctioneer's eyes found him, and something like pity flickered across the man's face. $500 to Cooper. Anyone else? Silence. The kind that feels like judgment. Going once. Going twice. The gavel fell like a coffin nail. Sold to Benjamin Cooper for $500. Ben paid in cash, mostly 20s and 10s, the last money from selling his truck and tools. The clerk counted it twice, as if expecting it to disappear. She handed him a receipt and a key ring with a single corroded key. "There's a title somewhere in the office," she said. "We'll mail it when we find it. Good luck, Mr. Cooper." He didn't need luck. He needed to disappear. The road to Blind Man's Slough wasn't maintained by the county. Ben's borrowed truck bounced through potholes deep enough to swallow a tire. Spanish moss hung from cypress trees like funeral shrouds, and the air grew thick with humidity and the smell of decay. Bear, his one-eyed mixed-breed dog, sat in the passenger seat, ears forward, sensing something wrong in this place. When the road ended, Ben parked and walked the last quarter-mile through mud that sucked at his boots. The slough appeared through the fog, like a wound in the landscape, dark water barely moving, surrounded by half-submerged logs and thick vegetation. And there, sagging against a rotting dock, was his houseboat. The last dime was uglier than Ben had imagined. 30 feet of plywood, sheet metal, and desperation. The hull was fiberglass, patched with what looked like duct tape and prayer. The cabin was a rectangular box, with windows so dirty they looked painted shut. A small outboard motor hung off the stern, crusted with rust. Bear whined low in his throat. "I know, boy," Ben said, "but it floats. That's all that matters." He spent the rest of the day making it habitable, swept out mouse droppings and dead insects, opened windows to air out the smell of mildew and gasoline, found a Coleman stove that still worked, and a foam mattress that was only half rotted. By sunset, he'd moved his few possessions aboard: a duffel bag of clothes, his grandfather's shotgun, a tackle box, and a photograph of his wife Margaret, dead now 8 years. That first night, Ben sat on the deck with Bear at his feet, watching fireflies dance over black water. For the first time in months, he felt something close to peace. Not happiness, he'd forgotten what that felt like, but the absence of constant dread. Out here, Councilman Greg Miller's reach didn't extend. Out here, there were no lawyers or court orders or sympathetic judges who somehow always ruled in favor of economic development. Out here, Ben Cooper could simply cease to matter. He didn't know yet that the river never lets anyone disappear completely. It has a way of bringing secrets to the surface. The heat came in the 3rd week of June, arriving like divine punishment. Temperatures climbed past 105 degrees and stayed there day after day. The Mud Creek River began to shrink, exposing sandbars that hadn't seen sun in decades. The water level dropped 6 inches, then a foot, then 2 feet. Ben watched it happen from his houseboat, anchored now in water so shallow he could see the bottom. Silt and beer cans and the ribs of an old John boat. The heat was oppressive, turning the cabin into an oven. He spent his days in the shade of a tarp, strung between the cabin and a cypress tree, reading paperback westerns from a box he'd found in the boat's storage locker. Bear, too old for this weather, lay panting in the coolest spot he could find, his one good eye tracking dragonflies. On the morning of June 23rd, Ben woke to barking. It was 5:47 a.m., still dark, and Bear was on his feet, hackles raised, staring at something beyond the boat. Ben grabbed the shotgun and stepped onto the deck. The fog was thick as cotton, but through it he could see Bear's attention fixed on a mudbank that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. "What is it, boy?" Bear barked again, then whined. Not his "there's a snake" warning, not his "there's a person" alert. Something else. Something wrong. Ben pulled on his boots and waded into the shallows. The water was warm as bathwater and barely reached his knees. The mud beneath was sticky, each step a small fight. Bear followed, moving carefully on 3 functional legs. The mud bank was about 20 yards from the boat, a long ridge of silt and clay that the receding river had exposed. As Ben got closer, he saw what had caught Bear's attention. Metal, curved and dark green, caked in mud, but unmistakably the roof of a vehicle. Ben's first thought was that someone had dumped a car here years ago, letting the river hide their crime. Happened all the time in places like this. But as he circled the exposed roof, clearing mud with his hands, he saw the trunk first, then the rear window, then the rear license plate. Indiana plates. The registration sticker said 2019, 5 years ago. Something cold moved through Ben's chest. He knew this car. Everyone in 3 counties knew this car, even if they'd never seen it in person. A dark green Ford Taurus, the kind lawyers drove when they wanted to look humble. Sam Lewis's car. Ben stood in the shallow water, staring at the roof of the Taurus as morning light began to burn through the fog. His mind worked slowly, processing what this meant. Sam Lewis had been the public defender in Jennings County, a man who took cases nobody else wanted. 5 years ago, when Councilman Greg Miller's development company started buying up farmland through what the newspapers called aggressive but legal eminent domain proceedings, Sam Lewis had been the only lawyer willing to fight back. He'd organized the farmers, filed lawsuits, made noise in the papers about geological surveys that didn't add up. Then, 3 weeks before the final court date, Sam Lewis disappeared. His secretary found his office cleaned out. His bank accounts showed a $50,000 withdrawal. Within days, rumors spread that Sam had run off with a mistress, a client he'd been defending in a divorce case, that he'd stolen money from the farmers' legal fund, that he was a fraud, a coward, a man who talked big but ran when the fight got real. The farmers lost their case. The land was seized. The development, a shopping complex that was supposed to create 300 jobs, broke ground 6 months later and then stalled, the land sitting empty behind chain-link fences. And Sam Lewis's car had been here all along, 20 feet underwater in Blind Man's Slough. Ben waded around to the driver's side door. The window was down, the interior filled with silt that had settled like concrete. He could see the steering wheel, the dashboard, the outline of something in the driver's seat that he didn't want to look at directly. He looked anyway. The skeleton was still held in place by the seatbelt. Leather shoes, dress pants, a polo shirt that had rotted into rags. The skull was tilted back against the headrest, jaw hanging open in what might have been a scream or might have been nothing at all. In the empty eye sockets, small fish had made nests. Ben had seen death before. Farm life didn't shelter you from it. But this was different. This was murder dressed up as disappearance. He forced himself to search the visible interior, found a wallet in the center console, leather so waterlogged it fell apart when he touched it. But inside, protected by plastic, was a driver's license, Samuel Aaron Lewis, born 1972, organ donor. Bear whined from the shore, sensing his master's distress. Ben took a breath and kept searching. His hand closed on something hard in the passenger footwell. A yellow Pelican case, the kind designed to be waterproof to 300 feet. It took both hands to pry it free from the silt. The latches were corroded, but intact. Ben carried it back to shore, his heart hammering against his ribs. Behind him the Taurus sat exposed in the growing light, a tomb the river had kept hidden until the heat forced its hand. Ben knew he should call the police. Knew he should leave everything untouched, let the authorities handle it. But he also knew who ran the sheriff's department in Jennings County, who appointed the judges, who controlled the newspapers. Greg Miller. On the deck of the Last Dime, with Bear watching anxiously, Ben opened the Pelican case. Inside were three things: a manila folder, a thumb drive, and a man's wristwatch. A Timex with a cracked crystal and a leather band that had survived better than its owner. Ben opened the folder first. The papers inside were damp around the edges but readable. Geological surveys, water tables, aquifer depth measurements, and maps, detailed professional maps showing underground water flow beneath what used to be Cooper Farm, Henderson Farm, the Morrison Place, all the land Miller's company had seized. Ben wasn't a geologist, but he'd farmed for 40 years. He knew what an aquifer looked like on paper, and this wasn't just any aquifer. This was a massive underground reservoir, millions of gallons, sitting beneath land that Miller had bought for pennies on the dollar under the pretense of commercial development. One document made it clear. A letter from Miller's company to a Chicago water management firm dated 6 months before Sam Lewis disappeared. It outlined a plan to drill deep wells, extract water during the droughts that climate change was making more frequent, and sell it back to the state at premium prices. The farmers hadn't been evicted for a shopping mall. They'd been evicted for water rights worth tens of millions. Sam Lewis had figured it out. These were the documents he was going to present in court, and someone had made sure he never got there. Ben's hands shook as he looked through the rest of the papers. There were handwritten notes in the margins, Sam's careful script pointing out discrepancies, lies in the environmental impact statements, payoffs to county inspectors, evidence of a conspiracy that stretched from the county courthouse to the state capitol. The thumb drive probably held digital copies, maybe emails, maybe more. Ben had no way to read it, no computer, no internet connection, but he knew someone who might. He closed the case and looked at the watch, turning it over in his calloused hands. On the back was an inscription: "To Dad, for always fighting the good fight. Love, Maggie." Maggie Lewis, Sam's daughter. She'd been working at the Riverbend Diner for years, serving coffee and pie to the same people who whispered about her father's disgrace. Ben had seen her there, had never said anything because what was there to say? Now he had something to say. He was staring at the watch when he heard the sound, a distant buzzing like a large hornet. Bear's ears went up. Ben looked toward the sky and saw it. A white drone, hovering about 200 feet above the exposed mud bank where the Taurus sat like evidence screaming for attention. His blood went cold. The county had been running drought surveys with drones, or so the newspaper said, monitoring water levels, checking for fire hazards, all very official and concerned. Miller's office had made a big show of it, pretending to care about the farmers his policies had destroyed. But this drone wasn't surveying. It was watching. Ben moved fast. He shoved the Pelican case under the foam mattress in the cabin, grabbed Bear's collar, and pulled the old dog inside. Through the dirty window, he watched the drone descend, circling the Taurus like a vulture. It hovered there for a long minute, cameras no doubt recording every detail, before climbing back into the sky and disappearing south toward town. Ben sat on the floor of the cabin, his back against the plywood wall, trying to think. Miller's people had seen the car. They knew it was exposed, and soon, maybe in hours, maybe in minutes, they'd know someone had been there, had disturbed the scene, had taken something. The smart play was to leave, fire up the outboard motor, run the houseboat upriver, hide in some other backwater slough until he figured out what to do. But the motor was loud, and the river was low, and there weren't many places a houseboat this ugly could go without being spotted. The other option was to stay hidden. Hope they assumed it was just kids or scavengers, wait for dark to make a move. Or option 3, take the fight to them. Ben thought about Sam Lewis, still sitting in his car after 5 years, his name turned to mud while his killer walked free. Thought about his own farm, his grandfather's land, now sitting empty behind chain-link fences while Miller got richer. Thought about all the men like him who'd been told to accept progress, to let go, to understand that this is just how things work now. He looked at Bear, who looked back with his one good eye, trusting completely. "We're going to town, boy," Ben said. "But first, we're going to need help." Ben waited until the heat of the afternoon, when the sun turned the river into hammered metal and most people stayed inside. He tied the last dime to a willow tree, hidden as best he could behind a thicket of undergrowth, and walked the 3 miles to the highway with Bear limping beside him. An old farmer named Henderson, who'd lost his land the same way Ben had, gave them a ride into Jennings Falls in his pickup. The River Bend Diner sat on Main Street, across from the courthouse where Ben had lost everything. It was a chrome and formica relic from the 1950s, the kind of place that served breakfast all day and closed at 7 p.m. sharp. Ben had eaten there 100 times when he still had money and a reason to come to town. Maggie Lewis was wiping down the counter when he walked in. She looked up, registered who he was, and something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe pity. Ben had that effect on people now. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice professionally neutral. "Need to talk to you," Ben said, quiet enough that the 2 old men in the corner booth couldn't hear. "About your father." Her expression didn't change, but her hand stopped moving. "Don't." "Found his car." The washcloth fell from her hand. For a long moment she just stared at him. Then she looked around the diner. The old men were absorbed in their argument about the weather. The cook was in back, and gestured to the last booth by the kitchen. Ben slid in across from her. Up close, he could see the resemblance, same sharp jawline Sam Lewis had, same intelligent eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. "Where?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Blind Man's Slough. River's dropped low enough to expose it." "Is he?" "Yes." She closed her eyes and took a breath that shook her whole frame. When she opened them again, they were dry, but something in them had hardened. "Did you call the police?" "No." "Why not?" Ben reached into his jacket, carefully because he knew she was scared, and scared people do unpredictable things, and pulled out the watch. He set it on the table between them. Maggie picked it up like it might crumble to dust. "Read the inscription." Her fingers traced the cracked crystal. "I gave him this for his 50th birthday, 2 months before he disappeared. It was in the car, along with other things, things that prove what really happened." She looked up at him. "What do you mean?" Ben told her everything. About the Pelican case, the geological surveys, the aquifer, Miller's plan to steal water rights while everyone thought he was building a shopping mall. about how Sam had figured it out and was going to expose it in court, about the drone that meant Miller's people already knew the car had been found. When he finished, Maggie sat very still. The diner sounds, the sizzle of the grill, the murmur of the old men, the clatter of dishes seemed distant, like they were in a bubble outside normal time. "My father didn't run away," she said finally. "Everyone in this town called him a coward. Said he abandoned me, stole money from the people he was supposed to help. I've been living with that for 5 years. 5 years of looking at people who think I'm the daughter of a thief." "He was murdered," Ben said, "and whoever did it has been free while your father's name got dragged through mud." Her eyes met his, and what he saw there wasn't grief anymore. It was cold, focused rage. "Where are these documents?" "Somewhere safe." "I want to see them." "You will. But first, I need to know if you're in, because once we start this, Miller's going to come after us with everything he has." "I'm in," she said without hesitation. "I've been waiting 5 years for someone to prove they all lied. You just handed me that proof. What do you need?" "I need somewhere to hide that's not on the water. I need someone who understands how to read legal documents and knows this town's power structure. And I need—" He paused, not sure how to say it. "I need someone who still believes this is worth fighting for." Maggie looked at the watch one more time, then slipped it onto her wrist. It hung loose, too big, but she didn't adjust it. "My shift ends at 6. Meet me at the old grain elevator on River Road, the one that's been abandoned since the flood of '08. Miller's people might be watching. They don't watch me anymore. I've been invisible for 5 years. She stood up, smoothed her apron. 6 o'clock. Don't be late, Mr. Cooper." Ben left $2 on the table and walked out into the brutal heat. Bear was waiting in the shade by the pickup, and together they started the long walk back to the river. He didn't know if Maggie Lewis would show up, didn't know if he could trust her or if desperation was making him stupid. But he knew one thing. Sam Lewis had died trying to stop Greg Miller, and Ben Cooper had spent 5 months hiding from the world, pretending he could just disappear. Turned out the world wasn't done with him yet. The old grain elevator rose up from the weeds like a tombstone for the farming industry. It had been shut down after the '08 flood destroyed the equipment, and now it sat rusting, covered in graffiti, slowly being reclaimed by kudzu and poison ivy. Ben and Bear waited in the shadow of the main structure, watching the road as sunset painted the sky the color of a bruise. Maggie's Honda Civic appeared at 6:03, pulling into the gravel lot with its lights off. She got out carrying a laptop bag and a thermos of coffee. In the fading light, Ben saw she'd changed from her waitress uniform into jeans and a t-shirt, practical clothes that said she understood what they were about to do. "Show me," she said. Ben had brought the Pelican case, wrapped in a garbage bag to keep the mud off. He opened it on the hood of her car and watched her face as she went through the documents, her expression moving from shock to anger to something that looked almost like vindication. "These surveys," she said, tapping one of the maps. "This is from the State Geological Department. It's official. They had to know about the aquifer when they approved Miller's eminent domain petition. They lied to the court. Or Miller paid them to lie." She pulled out the letter to the Chicago Water Company, read it twice. Jesus Christ. He was planning this for years. The whole shopping mall story was just cover. She looked up at Ben. "Do you know how much money is at stake here? Tens of millions, I'm guessing. More. With climate change making droughts worse, water rights are going to be worth more than oil in 10 years. Miller didn't just steal your land, Mr. Cooper. He stole a fortune that should have gone to you and everyone else who lost their farms." Ben felt something twist in his chest. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that, but a deeper sense of betrayal. They hadn't just lost their land. They'd been robbed of a future they didn't even know existed. "Can we use this?" he asked. Maggie looked at the thumb drive. If we can get to a computer with internet, I can upload these to the State Attorney General's office, the EPA, every investigative journalist I can find, but—" She paused, thinking. Miller's not stupid. If that drone spotted the car, he knows someone might have found evidence. He's going to be looking for whoever has it. He's going to be looking for me. And anyone helping you. She met his eyes. My apartment's already compromised. If Miller wants to search it, Sheriff Doyle will give him a warrant in 5 minutes. Then we need to stay mobile. On your houseboat? Unless you've got a better idea. Maggie thought for a moment, then laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You know what? Fuck it. I've spent 5 years serving coffee to people who think my father was a criminal. If we're going to clear his name, we do it right. We do it loud. And we make sure everyone knows Greg Miller is a murderer. Ben felt something he hadn't felt in months. Hope. Small and fragile, but real. Pack what you need, he said. We leave tonight. And Maggie? Yeah? Thank you. For believing. She looked at the watch on her wrist, her father's watch, and her expression hardened. I'm not doing this for you, Mr. Cooper. I'm doing this for him. Let's go burn everything down. They made it back to Blind Man's Slough just after midnight. The last dime sat where Ben had left it, hidden in the shadows, and for a moment he let himself believe they might actually have a chance. Then he saw the lights on the water. 2 boats, running without navigation lights, moving slowly through the shallows. Searchlights swept the banks, looking for something, looking for him. Get down, Ben hissed, pulling Maggie into the undergrowth. Bear pressed himself flat against the mud, ears pinned back. They watched as the boats approached the exposed Taurus. Men in tactical gear, not police uniforms, but the kind of private security that men like Miller hired when they needed things done quietly, climbed out and surrounded the car. They had portable lights, cameras, equipment for a thorough search. One man waded to the driver's side and looked inside. Even from 50 yards away, Ben could see him stiffen, hear him call to the others. They knew. They'd found Sam Lewis's body, and they knew someone had already been there. The boat split up. One stayed at the car. The other began sweeping the slough, its spotlight cutting through the darkness like a blade. It was moving toward the last dime. Ben made a decision. Stay here. Don't move until I signal. What are you going to do? Buy us time. Before Maggie could stop him, Ben moved through the darkness toward his houseboat. He knew this slough better than anyone alive, knew every submerged log, every shallow sandbar, every spot where the current ran strange. The men in their tactical boats knew none of it. He reached the last dime as the searchlight found it, heard voices calling out, "Boat ahead! Someone's living there!" Ben climbed aboard, fired up the outboard motor. It coughed, sputtered, caught, and opened the throttle. The houseboat lurched forward with all the speed and grace of a drunk cow, but it moved. The tactical boat gave chase, its powerful motor closing the distance fast. Ben could hear them shouting, ordering him to stop. A spotlight pinned him, turning night into day. He steered the last dime toward a section of the slough he'd been avoiding for weeks, a place where the old channel ran deep but narrow, lined with submerged cypress stumps that could gut a hull like a knife. The men chasing him didn't know that. At the last second, Ben cut the motor and grabbed Bear, jumping into the shallows as the last dime drifted into the stumps. Behind him, the tactical boat tried to follow. Its driver realized the danger too late. The crunch of fiberglass hitting wood was loud enough to wake dead things. The boat listed hard to starboard, its motor shrieking as the prop chewed itself apart on submerged timber. Men shouted, scrambled, tried to save equipment that was already sliding into dark water. Ben didn't wait to see more. He and Bear splashed through the shallows, back to where Maggie was hiding, grabbed her hand, and pulled her deeper into the swamp. "What did you do?" she gasped. "Gave them something to deal with besides us. Come on, we need to get to the highway before they call for backup." They ran through darkness thick as tar, guided only by Ben's knowledge of terrain he'd walked 100 times. Behind them, lights and voices faded into the distance. But Ben knew it was temporary. Miller's people would regroup, and next time they'd come with more men, better equipment, and no mercy. By the time they reached the highway, dawn was breaking over a world that suddenly felt very small. Maggie's car was where they'd left it at the grain elevator. They climbed in, muddy and exhausted, and she started driving, north, away from Jennings Falls, away from the river, toward anything that looked like safety. In the passenger seat, Ben held the Pelican case on his lap and tried not to think about the last dime, sinking slowly in the blind man's slough, taking with it the last piece of the life he'd been trying to leave behind. They spent 2 days hiding in a motel outside Indianapolis, paying cash, using fake names, trying to figure out their next move. Maggie worked on her laptop, copying the files from the thumb drive, sending encrypted emails to journalists and government officials. Ben watched the news, waiting for word about Sam Lewis's car, about the body, about anything that would force the investigation into the open. Nothing came. Instead, on the morning of the 3rd day, they saw Greg Miller on television. A press conference. The councilman stood behind a podium, looking concerned and sincere, flanked by Sheriff Doyle and 2 state environmental inspectors. "It has come to our attention," Miller said, his voice heavy with regret, "that the recent drought has exposed a vehicle in Blind Man's Slough containing human remains. We have positively identified the deceased as Samuel Lewis, the attorney who disappeared 5 years ago under suspicious circumstances involving embezzlement and client abandonment." Ben's hands clenched into fists. Miller continued, "This tragic discovery confirms what many suspected, that Mr. Lewis, facing exposure and prosecution, took his own life. We have found evidence in the vehicle suggesting he drove into the slough intentionally. The sheriff's department has investigated thoroughly and determined this to be a suicide. Our hearts go out to his family." Maggie made a sound like something breaking. "Suicide? They're calling it suicide." On screen, a reporter asked about the environmental impact surveys Miller's company had filed. "All our surveys were conducted according to state regulations," Miller said smoothly. "Any suggestion otherwise is conspiracy theory, likely perpetuated by the same anti-development activists who have opposed progress in our county for years. We welcome scrutiny. We have nothing to hide." The press conference ended. Maggie stood up, walked to the bathroom, and Ben heard the sound of her being sick. When she came out, her face was pale but determined. "He's burying it. He's rewriting what happened, making my father the criminal again. What about the documents, the evidence? I sent them to 7 different people. 3 haven't responded. 2 said they'd look into it. The other 2 said the documents could be faked, that without independent verification and a criminal investigation already underway, there's nothing they can do." She sat down hard on the bed. "Miller controls the investigation. He controls the narrative. And we're just 2 people with no credibility, no platform, and no way to fight back." Ben thought about his houseboat, probably already towed away as evidence, about his few possessions, now in police custody, about how easy it was for men with power to erase men without it. "There's one thing we can do," he said slowly. "What?" "We go back. We make so much noise they can't ignore us. We stand in front of that courthouse with those documents, and we make them arrest us on camera, in front of witnesses. We force them to prosecute or let us go. Either way, the story gets out." Maggie looked at him like he was insane. "They'll arrest us. Miller will find some charge. Trespassing, theft, obstruction. We'll rot in jail while he buries everything." "Maybe. Or maybe there's enough honest people left in that town who'll see what's happening and care. Maybe someone will film it, put it online, make it harder for Miller to control the story." "That's a lot of maybes, Mr. Cooper." Ben looked at her father's watch on her wrist. Your dad didn't run from this fight. He died trying to win it. I've been running for 5 months. I'm done running." Maggie was quiet for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and pulled up a map. "If we're doing this, we do it right. There's a farmer's market on the courthouse lawn every Saturday. 100 people, maybe more. Local news usually covers it. We show up with the documents, we start talking, we get it on camera before they can shut us down. When's the next market? Day after tomorrow." Ben nodded. 2 days to prepare, 2 days to decide if this was courage or stupidity, maybe both. "All right," he said, "let's go tell the truth." They drove back to Jennings Falls on Friday night, taking back roads, avoiding the main highway where state troopers might be looking for Maggie's Honda. Ben had shaved his beard, and Maggie wore a baseball cap, small disguises that probably wouldn't fool anyone looking carefully, but might buy them a few extra minutes. The town looked the same, small, tired, slowly dying like every rural county in America. But Ben saw it differently now. Saw the courthouse where corrupt judges had ruled against farmers who'd worked their land for generations. Saw the sheriff's office where Doyle took orders from Miller instead of serving the law. Saw the diner where Maggie had served coffee to people who whispered about her father's disgrace. They parked 3 blocks from the courthouse and walked through the warm evening air toward the farmers' market setup area. Tomorrow this lawn would be filled with vendors selling corn, tomatoes, honey, handmade crafts. Families would come. The local news would send a reporter. It would be perfect if they survived until then. "Mr. Cooper." Ben turned to see Sheriff Doyle standing beside his cruiser, hand resting on his service weapon. 2 deputies flanked him. "Been looking for you," Doyle said conversationally. "Had some questions about a boat that got destroyed in Blind Man's Slough. Belongs to you, apparently." "I'm here to answer questions," Ben said carefully, "but not tonight. Tomorrow at the farmer's market I'll answer every question you got in front of witnesses." Doyle's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid I need you to come with me now. You too, Miss Lewis." "On what charge?" Maggie demanded. "Obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, theft of government documents." Doyle smiled, cold and professional. "Councilman Miller is pressing charges. Says you stole surveying equipment from a secure site. That's a felony, Mr. Cooper." Ben's heart sank. Miller had moved faster than they'd expected, used his connections to manufacture charges before they could tell their story. "We have proof," Maggie started. "You have documents you claim are proof," Doyle interrupted. "But without a proper chain of custody, without authentication, they're just paper. Now are you going to come peacefully or do I need to use restraints?" Ben looked at Maggie, saw the same calculation in her eyes. Fight here and lose everything, or comply and hope for a chance later. They chose compliance. The Jennings County Jail was small, old, and smelled like disinfectant trying to cover something worse. They separated Ben and Maggie immediately, putting them in different cell blocks, making sure they couldn't coordinate their stories. Ben sat in a holding cell with 2 drunks and a kid who'd been caught with marijuana. Nobody talked. The fluorescent lights never turned off. Around 2 a.m., Sheriff Doyle came to his cell. "Got someone wants to talk to you." They walked Ben down a long hallway to an interview room. And there, sitting at a metal table with a water bottle and a legal pad, was Councilman Greg Miller. He looked tired, Ben thought. Dark circles under his eyes, his suit rumpled in a way that suggested he'd been dealing with this crisis for days without sleep. But his smile was still politician perfect. "Mr. Cooper, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Didn't agree to anything." "Fair enough." Miller gestured to the empty chair. "Please, sit. We have things to discuss." Ben remained standing. Miller sighed. "I know what you think I am. I know what Sam Lewis told people, what he believed. And I understand why you might see me as the villain in this story, but the truth is more complicated than a simple morality tale. You killed Sam Lewis." "I did no such thing." Miller's voice didn't rise, didn't crack. Sam Lewis was a troubled man who made poor choices. He was drinking heavily in the months before he disappeared. He'd taken money from clients. When he realized the truth was coming out, he panicked. "That's horse shit, and you know it." "Do I?" Miller leaned forward. "Here's what I know, Mr. Cooper. I know that Sam Lewis drove his car into Blind Man's Slough 5 years ago, drunk and desperate. I know that he had documents in his possession, documents he'd stolen from secure government offices, because he was planning one last desperate gambit to stop progress in this county. And I know that when his plan failed, when he realized he'd never win in court, he made a final, terrible choice." "Suicide," Ben said flatly. "Suicide," Miller confirmed. "Tragic, but clear. The medical examiner will confirm it when we complete our autopsy. The coroner's inquest will rule accordingly, and life in Jennings County will go on." "What about the aquifer? What about the water rights you stole?" For the first time, something flickered across Miller's face, not quite anger, but close. "I stole nothing. The geological surveys were thorough and legal. The water management plan for that land was approved by state officials. Everything I did was within the law. You paid those officials. I contributed to their campaigns, yes, as is my right, as is every citizen's right." Miller stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. "Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Cooper. You're going to be charged with theft, trespassing, and obstruction. Those charges will stick because you did, in fact, commit those crimes. You'll spend 6 months in county lockup, maybe more if you fight it. Miss Lewis will face similar charges." He walked to the door, paused. "Or you can accept a plea deal. You plead guilty to a lesser charge, pay a fine, serve probation. And in exchange, you leave this county and never come back. You forget about Sam Lewis, forget about water rights, forget about everything. And if I don't," Miller smiled, "then I will destroy what little you have left, your reputation, your freedom, your life. I will make sure every person you know understands that you are a criminal and a liar. And when you finally get out of prison, there will be nothing waiting for you but more emptiness." He opened the door. Sheriff Doyle was waiting outside. "Think about it," Miller said. "You have 24 hours to decide." Ben didn't sleep that night. He lay on a plastic mattress in his cell, staring at the ceiling, trying to find a way out that didn't end with Miller winning. In the morning, they brought him back to the interview room. This time Maggie was there, looking exhausted but defiant. A public defender Ben didn't recognize sat between them, reviewing paperwork. "Your situation is not good," the lawyer said without preamble. "The prosecution has evidence of trespassing, theft of documents, and destruction of property. If this goes to trial, you'll lose. My recommendation is to take the plea deal." "What about the evidence we have?" Maggie demanded. "What about the documents proving Miller's fraud?" "Without proper authentication and chain of custody, those documents are inadmissible in court. And frankly, even if they were admissible, this court is not the place to fight that battle. You need federal investigators, the state attorney general, the EPA, but none of them will touch this case while you're facing criminal charges." "So Miller wins," Ben said. The lawyer looked at him with something like pity. "Miller always wins, Mr. Cooper. Men like him are very good at winning. Your job now is to minimize the damage." Maggie slammed her hand on the table. "My father died fighting this. I'm not going to—" "Your father died because he underestimated how far Miller would go to protect his interests," the lawyer interrupted. "Don't make the same mistake." They sat in silence for a long moment. Then the door opened and Sheriff Doyle entered holding a document. "Got something you need to see," he said, handing it to the public defender. The lawyer read it, frowned, read it again. "This is a motion to dismiss all charges filed by the prosecutor's office." "What?" Maggie grabbed the paper. Doyle looked uncomfortable. "Councilman Miller withdrew his complaint, says it was a misunderstanding. You're free to go." Ben didn't believe it. Why would he do that? Don't know, don't care. You want to sit here and ask questions, or you want to leave? They left. Outside the jail, the morning sun was brutally bright. Maggie's car was in the impound lot, and they drove in silence back to the motel where they'd left their belongings. Ben's mind was racing, trying to understand Miller's play. You didn't just drop charges out of kindness. There had to be an angle. They found it when they got to the motel. The room had been searched. Not by police. This was different. Professional. Everything was exactly where they'd left it, but slightly wrong, like someone had photographed the room and then put everything back from memory, and the Pelican case was gone. Maggie checked her laptop. The hard drive had been wiped, the files deleted so thoroughly that even data recovery would be impossible. The thumb drive was missing. They'd been robbed of everything. "Son of a bitch," Maggie whispered. "Miller let us go because he doesn't need us in jail anymore. He has the evidence. He has everything." Ben sat down on the bed, feeling the last of his fight drain away. Miller had outplayed them, had them arrested, searched their belongings under cover of police authority, taken the documents, and then released them because they were no longer a threat. It was almost elegant. "What do we do now?" Maggie asked. Ben didn't have an answer. They drove aimlessly for hours, unable to form a plan, unwilling to give up, but not knowing how to continue. Finally, as sunset painted the sky purple and gold, Ben told Maggie to drive to Blind Man's Slough. "Why?" she asked. "Because that's where it started. Maybe that's where it needs to end." The last dime was still there, wedged among the cypress stumps, but someone had been through it. The few possessions Ben had left, his grandfather's shotgun, his clothes, the photograph of Margaret, were gone. Taken as evidence or simply stolen, it didn't matter. The boat itself was ruined, the hull cracked, taking on water. Ben stood on the deck and looked out at the slough. Sam Lewis's car was gone too, towed away to some evidence locker where it would be filed, forgotten, and eventually destroyed. All trace of the truth erased, as if it had never existed. "I'm sorry," he said to Maggie. "I thought we could beat him. I was wrong." She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was strange. "Mr. Cooper, when you found my father's car, did you look in the trunk?" "No." "Why?" "Because my father was paranoid about losing important documents. He always kept backups. Physical backups, hidden in places no one would think to look." She was staring at the water where the Taurus had been. If Miller's people searched the car, they would have focused on the passenger compartment, the glove box, under the seats. They wouldn't have thought to check the spare tire well. Ben's heart began to beat faster. "You think there might be more evidence?" "I think my father was smarter than Miller gave him credit for. And I think if we can find that car before it gets destroyed, we might have one more chance." The county impound lot was surrounded by chain-link fence, lit by sodium lights that turned everything the color of old bruises. A single security guard sat in a booth at the entrance, reading a paperback novel. Ben and Maggie watched from across the street, hidden in Maggie's car. They'd been there for 2 hours, waiting for the guard to take his dinner break. When he finally stood up and walked toward the office building, they moved. The fence was easy to climb. Getting to the car, parked in a back corner, already tagged for evidence destruction, took longer. They had to avoid security cameras, slip between rows of impounded vehicles, move like ghosts through a graveyard of metal. The Taurus was still covered in dried mud. Someone had removed Sam Lewis's body, but otherwise the car looked untouched. Ben tried the trunk, locked. He used a tire iron from a nearby truck to pry it open. The trunk popped with a sound like a gunshot, and they both froze, listening for alarms, for voices, for any sign they'd been caught. Silence. Inside the trunk was a spare tire, a jack, and a plastic case for emergency supplies. Ben lifted the spare tire. Underneath, wrapped in plastic and duct tape, was a second folder. Maggie grabbed it with shaking hands. Inside were more documents. These ones older, more detailed. Depositions from state officials who'd quit rather than sign off on Miller's surveys. Emails between Miller and his lawyer discussing how to manage the investigation into Sam's disappearance. And a handwritten note from Sam Lewis himself, dated the day before he disappeared. "If you're reading this, I'm dead. Greg Miller has threatened my family. He's connected to people who make problems disappear. I've been gathering evidence for 18 months, and I'm about to present it in court. But if I don't make it, whoever finds this needs to know. Miller killed Tom Henshaw in 2017 when Tom wouldn't sell his land. The sheriff ruled it an accident, but I have a witness. Miller is responsible for at least 3 deaths that I can prove. He will kill again if someone doesn't stop him." Ben and Maggie read it twice in the yellow light. This wasn't just fraud anymore. This was murder, multiple murders, stretching back years. "We need to go," Ben said. "Now." They ran for the fence, clutching the folder. Behind them, the security guard's radio crackled. Someone had noticed the broken trunk, noticed the car that had been disturbed. They made it over the fence, just as spotlights blazed to life, made it to Maggie's car, and pulled away as the guard ran out, shouting into his radio. This time, they didn't drive to a motel. They drove straight to the state capitol, 3 hours away, to the Attorney General's office. They arrived at 11 p.m. and refused to leave the lobby until someone agreed to see them. At 2 a.m., a deputy attorney general named Sarah Chen came down, tired and irritated. Ben and Maggie laid out the entire story, showed her the documents, showed her Sam Lewis's final note. Chen read everything in silence. When she finished, she looked at them with an expression Ben couldn't quite read. "This is credible," she said finally. "This is enough to open an investigation. But you need to understand, Greg Miller has friends in high places. This is going to be dangerous for you." "We know," Maggie said, "and it's going to take time, months, maybe years, to build a case that sticks." "We'll wait," Ben said. Chen nodded. "All right. I'm putting you in protective custody, effective immediately. No one knows where you are until we have Miller in handcuffs. Agreed?" They agreed. 7 months later, Ben Cooper stood on the deck of a new boat, a proper trawler this time, sturdy and seaworthy, and watched the sun rise over the Mud Creek River. The water was high now, the drought broken by a winter of heavy rains. The sloughs and backwaters were full again, hiding their secrets beneath dark water. Greg Miller was in federal custody, awaiting trial on 3 counts of murder, conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. Sheriff Doyle had been arrested too, along with 2 county judges and the head of the State Geological Survey. The case had made national news, another story of corruption in rural America, another reminder that power without accountability always corrupts. Sam Lewis's name had been cleared. There was talk of naming a park after him, maybe a scholarship fund. Maggie had given interviews, told her father's story, made sure everyone knew he'd been a hero, not a coward. As for Ben, he'd used his settlement money, a substantial sum once the state admitted it had illegally seized his land, to buy this trawler, not to hide this time, but to live the life he'd always wanted. He spent his days navigating the river, fishing, helping other people who'd been displaced by Miller's schemes find their footing again. Maggie visited on weekends, bringing supplies, staying to help with whatever project Ben was working on. They'd become something like family, bound by trauma and triumph in equal measure. Bear had died in the spring, peacefully, in his sleep. Ben had buried him on the bank of Blind Man's Slough, under a willow tree. It seemed right, somehow, to leave part of his old life in that place where everything had changed. The river moved beneath his boat, endless and patient, keeping its secrets and occasionally giving them back. Ben had learned something from it, that you couldn't really disappear, not completely. The world had a way of dragging you back into its currents, but you could choose what you did when it did. You could run or you could fight. Ben Cooper had tried running. It hadn't worked, so he'd fought. And somehow, impossibly, he'd won, not the farm. That was gone forever. The land sold to pay Miller's debts, broken up among developers who had nothing to do with his crimes. Ben mourned it sometimes, late at night when the river was quiet, but the grief was manageable now. He'd learned that home wasn't just land. It was the choices you made, the people you protected, the stand you took when everything tried to push you down. He'd lost the land, but he'd conquered the river. And on a bright morning in June, with the water running clear and strong beneath his boat, that felt like enough.